I like to run really far in the mountains. Like some of you raised your hands, I think the furthest that I've run without coming out was like 56 hours or something like that. And I've also done multiple day back-to-back runs where you're running for 10 or 12 hours a day, day after day after day after day. And sometimes, as you can see in that picture in the upper right, that takes a lot of food. That picture I took in August before we started running the King's Trail in Sweden. We did 220 miles hut to hut over 5 days and carried the majority of our own food. So that was what I was going to eat while I was running. Down in the bottom corner, you see my friend Fred. That was about halfway through the run, and we bribed some tube cheese off of some hikers because we were tired eating gels and stuff like that. It was one of the best things I've ever eaten, cheese in a tube. And then the picture on your left is Jeff Browning and I in the middle of a 70-mile run through Patagonia that we did in December. And we actually had a crew spot, so we were able to load up a bunch more food. Let's talk about some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about food, and we're going to talk about hydration. And I'm going to break them into two separate things, even though that line can get kind of blurry sometimes. And as far as food, we're going to talk about what you eat before, during, and after you run, so you can survive this a little bit better. So before you run, we could consider this as like what you eat all the time, right? This is the food that you eat on a day-to-day basis. And if you want to be strong when you're running, what kinds of foods should you be eating?
Protein.
Okay, I hear protein.
Real food.
I hear real food. Vegetables. That kid gets an A+ for the night. I'm going to tell you this, healthy, right? For some people, that might mean that they're eating more protein than carbs or more carbs than fat, or there's a bazillion different fad diets and things that people latch onto, and it works for them. So I'm not going to get into that too much. Let's narrow it down a little bit more and talk about the week before your event. And your event may be a long run in the mountains. It may be the Scout Mountain races. It might be the Minam Butte Challenge. What do you eat the week before? McDonald's, yeah, sometimes. That's what I want to get to. Everybody's like, what do I eat before? You should eat what you normally eat, right? You don't have to get crazy. Eat what works for you. What about the night before?
I know it works for me is I can't eat a bunch of carbs like they say to do. That doesn't work for me.
Yeah, this is a question I ask my wife all the time, and it upsets her. And I was like, who's they? Who's they that said we need to eat a bunch of carbs? Well, they is a bunch of nutritionists that did some studies a long time ago that really aren't that good. Because you eat a bunch of carbs, you get kind of bloated, you don't feel really well the next morning. So I'm going to stick with John's answer again. Eat what you're used to. My secret race food is a hamburger and sweet potato fries. That works really good for me. If you ate that the night before, you might feel awful, right? So you have to figure out what works for you. And this is going to be a theme throughout the whole rest of the night. How do you figure out what works the night before a race? You practice. And what's practice for racing? Training, right? Try it in training. If you're going to run a race that starts at 5 o'clock in the morning, why not eat the night before you go on a training run at 5 o'clock in the morning? See how you feel. See what works for you. Don't try it on the day before a race. It's not a good time to try and figure out what you're going to do, because you probably will screw it up, and you'll probably feel crappy, and you waste all this money on an entry fee, and then you feel bad about yourself, and it just sucks. And you feel sad, and then you eat more food. Anyways, okay, so let's narrow this down. Let's talk about the day of your event. What do you eat the morning before a race? Sean, got any ideas? What do you eat before? Apple and peanut butter. So he's getting, what is he getting in apples and peanut butter?
Protein, fats, and carbs.
Protein and carbs, something that's going to stick with him for a little while. And I'm guessing that he's used that before. Works well for you, right? If I eat an apple beforehand, it doesn't work well for me. What works well for me is I have some oatmeal, and I put an egg in it. And this is going to sound really gross, but I really like that Quaker instant oatmeal. And I put an egg in that. It's really good. And you're surprised how long it lasts with you. What you want to do, what I would recommend doing, is finding something that you can eat a couple of hours before the start of your race. So you can eat it, and it settles. I'm not going to eat that package of oatmeal 30 minutes before I start running. because it's not going to feel very good, particularly the way that I tend to go out on races, which is too fast, and then my stomach really revolts, and it's bad. So what about 30 minutes before you start? Gatorade. Is that what you've used before? Okay, does it work for you? Awesome. Okay, that's great. What about you? What was that? Tailwind. Ooh, plug for the sponsors. Perfect. I like to drink a bottle of Ultragen, which is ironic because it's a recovery drink. But the reason that I like to drink that is it also has a little bit of protein. Sticks with me. So the theme here is what you eat beforehand is you want to have something that when you start running is kind of getting metabolized already. It's not all in your stomach still, and it's going to stick with you for a while. Okay? Let's talk about during the run. This is the one that people have the most trouble with. I'm going to do another raise of hands. Who here has thrown up during a trail race or trail run? Yeah, it's pretty sweet, huh? Or after. That's my favorite time to throw up is after. Okay, so those of you who have thrown up during, could you figure out why? What was it, Ryan?
Too much.
Too much food.
Too much of it.
Okay.
It tasted great when I was going down, but I still can't eat watermelon.
It's sad lessons we learn like that. Anybody else?
Lack of hydration.
Okay, so you didn't stay hydrated enough. Okay, what about you? It was gels. Okay, so you'd been eating them for a while, it was working, but after a time it stopped working. Enrique, did you have?
No, I was saying hi to Mom.
Okay, right on. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about during the run. And before we get really into the race day, do you need to eat on every run?
No.
Okay, let's take a poll. Who says yes and who says no? Okay, so yes for eating every run.
Are you giving us a time on this or no?
Distance?
I'm just every run.
Nope.
Okay, so no's. Everybody says no, you don't have to eat on every run. Okay, there's a bunch of smart people in here. Why do you have to eat on a run?
For me, it's because, and this is maybe what I'm imagining, is that I'm going to burn up more calories than I have stored, and so I have to be replenishing them as I go, or I'm
Okay.
just going to run out of fuel.
Yeah, at some point, you're going to run out of fuel. And are you going to run out of fuel to the point that you die? No. The body has this really awesome self-preservation mechanism that if you start pushing it too hard, then it just makes things stop working so that the brain can get the sugar that it needs to keep you alive. Okay? So, let's talk about science for a minute here. And I put this picture up very specifically because this was a bad moment for me. This was at the Bear 100 last year, actually. And I was learning lessons. I've been doing this for 8 years, competitively at a high level, and you would think that I'd not learned a thing by the way that I was running that day. So let's take, and Sean might disprove me on some of the numbers here if there's more accurate stuff, but we're going to go with what I got here. So glycogen stores is how much readily available fuel your body has. And we store it in our muscles, we store it in our liver, and there's some in our bloodstream. And each of us have roughly 15 grams per kilograms. Metric system, everybody's heads just melted a little bit. We'll convert over. That means if you weigh 175 pounds, that you have about 4,800 calories. If you're running, how many calories an hour do you typically burn? Ooh. Oh, I'm seeing all sorts of numbers here. It'll depend a little bit on effort. You know, we're going to say a moderate to hard effort is how much? I hear 600. Any other takers? They're going to throw their 1,000, 700, about 1,000 if you're going to a moderate to hard effort. So that's going to last you, if you depleted all of your glycogen stores and you weigh 175 pounds, how long are you going to last? 4.5 hours. Body preserves itself, right? So you actually are only going to get about 90 minutes to 2.5 hours of good fuel before the body starts switching over to other systems. So if we're not getting fuel from glycogen, which is sugar, where are we going to get fuel from? Fat, okay. What's the problem with burning fat while you're running?
Takes a while to switch over.
Well, no, absolutely nothing. You're right. Great answer. So that's one answer, yes, nothing. The other answer is it takes more effort and it's not as quick. So if you're burning fat stores and your body isn't accustomed to doing that, it's not going to be as efficient. So you're not going to be able to run as hard. Okay? What other place can you get energy from? Which is what? If we kind of break that into carbohydrates or sugars, fats, and protein. Okay, so you can get it from protein. Also, not a very efficient source. And if you're running and you're using your actual muscle to fuel your running, how's that going to go for you?
Is that when you smell like ammonia after a run?
That can lead to that. Yeah, it can lead to a whole bad pathway of things. Muscle destruction is badness and can lead to rhabdomyolysis and all sorts of nasty, nasty things that you don't want to do. So we know that we can last about 90 minutes on average. Some people can train themselves to be more efficient at burning fat and do a lot longer than that. So what the heck do you eat while you're out there? This slide is a shameless plug for everyone that helped us out tonight. You can eat goo, you can eat Tailwind, Omni bars, First Endurance. There's lots and lots of stuff out there. If we're talking about efficiency on how to get fuel to our body as quickly as possible, what's the simplest thing you can consume? Sugar, right? It's so funny that all of these crazy fit runners just want to eat a bunch of sugary treats all the time. But it works well. But different types of sugars work for different people. So one of the things that we wanted to do tonight is provide you with a bunch of different stuff to try. Because what's the best place to practice that in? Training. I can tell you what works for me. What works for me when I'm running far is I tend to get a portion of my calories from a hydration source, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, and then from gels. At the Bear 100 last year, I ate 46 goo gels. Ooh, yeah, that's right. I couldn't eat them for like 3 months afterwards. The thought of it actually would make me gag. But it worked really well while I was running. So one of those little packets is about 100 calories. So if I'm burning 1,000 calories an hour, I should eat 10 an hour? What will happen if I do that? Who threw up gels? Back here. You puke, right? How many calories can you absorb in an hour while running? Anybody know? I'm seeing 200 to 300, 400. About 300 is the average. So that would mean eating one of those every 20 minutes. Okay, you're going to run 60K. It's going to take you 10 hours. That's 20 gels. Ugh. Right? It doesn't sound particularly appetizing. Or excuse me, that's not 20 gels. It's 30 gels because it's one every 20 minutes. For me, it works to eat about one every half hour. I'm still using my fat stores. I'm still using the glycogen in my body, but that's enough to keep me moving forward. I learned this really cool trick when I was in Patagonia. You'd been eating gels long enough that they made you sick, right? It gets to the point, who has had flavor fatigue or just gel fatigue out there? It's pretty rough, right? You got all these gels in your pockets, and that's what you're planning on eating, and all of a sudden you can't eat them. Well, I learned this cool trick when we were down there, that if I take an Omni bar and put that in my pocket, and about every fourth gel, I take a bite of the Omni bar. Not the whole bar, because if I eat the whole bar, it doesn't work really well for me. That actually kind of reset the system, give me something totally different to work on, and I could eat gels again. That's after 8 years of ultra running competitively that I found something that made it seem magical to eat gels all day long. So I'm going to go back to this again. Try it in practice. Try it over and over again. And when you think you have it figured out, something will go on, you'll throw up a bunch, and you'll have to start over. You'll learn the process all over again. So let's shift gears here. If I'm just eating goo gels, what problem am I going to run to if I'm just eating those and I'm not drinking anything or not doing anything else? What else is in those? And in most other, okay, caffeine's in there, which can get you all spracked out. I heard somebody back there. Sodium. Yeah, there's a lot of electrolytes in those things. And if you just keep eating all this stuff with electrolytes in it, what's the result? What's that? That's the very, very far end of the spectrum, but yes, your heart stops working. Before that, cramps can be part of it. You get something called hypernatremia, and your body is doing everything it can to control that, so it starts pulling fluid from inside the cells or from different places, and you start feeling really crappy. You get nauseous, you get weak, people pass out. A good friend of mine this last weekend, at a really competitive race, he's a high-level professional runner, he passed out and has no recollection of 15 minutes of his life because he wasn't drinking enough liquids. He went to the emergency room afterwards, got 5 liters of fluid, felt like $1 million. But it's because he drove himself the opposite direction you think. He just got too many electrolytes in his system. What happens if you're just drinking water and you're not eating anything? The opposite problem can happen. You can dilute out, and your heart can stop with that one too. But you can run into the same problem. So you have to find this magical balance. So I know through training for a long time that I don't need to drink a lot of water. I can drink about 8 ounces every hour on a hot day and be fine. How much do you need to drink, John? A lot more. I ran across John middle of the summer last year, and we were about equal distance from the trailheads that we had both started at. And John had a hydration pack on and salt rings on his shirt. And I had half a water bottle in my pocket, and my shirt was dry. Our hydration needs are very different, right? And his electrolyte needs are very different. What does it tell you if you start getting salt rings on your face or on your shirt? You're sweating out a lot of electrolytes, and so you probably need to be replacing those. So there are a lot of products out there. We'll use Gatorade, right? There's Tailwind, there's First Endurance. There are all of these different things that are claimed to work better than others. And I'll be honest with you. For me, First Endurance works better than anything else. But that may not be the case for you. And so I'm not going to be able to plug one product over and over again that it's going to be the magical thing for everybody. You got to figure it out. A couple of things that I would tell you. Play with the strengths of the electrolyte drink that you're using. Straight Gatorade might be too much for some people, but if you have half and half water, half Gatorade, that might be just right. A lot of the powder drink mix will give you suggestions of a couple of different ways to mix it. And then you have to balance out, if you're having an electrolyte drink, does it have calories or not? Tailwind does have calories in it. First Endurance does. Noon, which is another really popular one, does not. So you need to keep in mind where you're getting your calories from as well. Because I might be able to take my 200 calories of goo plus 100 calories of electrolyte drink and get the 300 calories an hour I need and be able to cruise right along. So let's bring up a question of real food during running.
You want to talk about tablets too? Just in
Oh,
case
yeah.
They don't want to drink them.
Yeah, so these are these the Goo Brew ones?
That's a good one.
So Goo Brew, similar to Noon, it's just an electrolyte tablet, no calories, but electrolytes. So some of these kind of give it the water kind of a fizzy pseudo-carbonation kind of thing.
That's just down the hatch.
Oh, you just take these. Oh, I'll talk about these in a minute. And that can help settle some people's stomachs. So before we get to pills and supplements and all of that fun world, let's talk about real food. What does an aid station look like at an ultra marathon?
At your marathons, they look awesome.
It's pretty an exciting place to be, right? What's typical aid station fare? What do you see?
Coke, Red Bull, potato.
Coke and Red Bull. That's really healthy stuff.
That's Carl's.
What's that? Doritos, potato chips of different varieties,
Peanut butter sandwich.
peanut butter sandwiches.
M&Ms.
One of my favorites, Carl's pierogies. If anybody has the pierogies at the Big Fur aid station. Quesadillas are fantastic. When we talk about things, we must be a bunch of people that love to eat food, right? What's the challenge with real food?
Digestion.
It's eating it, right? Depending on your effort level, some of that stuff may not agree with you. That is the hardest thing to practice in training, right? I mean, unless you can convince John to meet you out at some trailhead in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon with a bunch of chips and his barbecue going making quesadillas, it's hard to practice. So that one's kind of a wild card. What I would tell you, when you get to a race, depending on how hard you want to go, stay away from unfamiliar things. As enticing as us race directors try to make those things, they can ruin your day really fast. If you're trying to go out and make it through, you're not trying to run really hard, maybe your effort level is a little bit more casual, you can probably eat a lot more of that stuff than when you're racing. The first time I got to experience that, I was pacing a friend at the Hard Rock 100 for the last 50 miles. He was worked beyond imagine, and we were walking a lot. And I got to eat at these aid stations, and I was blown away by how much food you can actually enjoy at a race. Because when I'm racing, I don't do that. I know what doesn't work for me, which is most everything on those tables. So again, I'm going back to the same thing. Practice, practice, practice. And if you're trying to set a personal best or something like that, only use what you're familiar with. Okay? So let's talk about that place you get to when you're in trouble. The infamous bonk. Who's bonked here? Okay, what's a bonk feel like? Yes, exactly. It's pretty much the worst feeling, right? I want to hear some personal bonks, though. All right, who's got a good bonk story? I'm going to guess Joe's got a good bonk story.
Oh, it was the 50K of the Pocatello 50 last year. The Pocatello 50 came out of the West Fork aid station and then started up Valve House.
Oh, yeah.
Hit me that I ended up on the side of the trail and throwing up.
So you stop moving forward.
Yeah, and then I blew up, got back on the trail, and was kind of in like a daze
Yeah.
for the next like 5 miles.
What's going on in a bonk? If we kind of get to the sciencey side of it. Self-preservation, right? The brain is saying, enough legs, I get the sugar for now, take a hike, or don't, and we're going to stop moving and let things kind of come back around. So there are a couple of different ways you can end up in that situation. One of them is not eating enough, right? Another one, ironically, is eating too much, right? You get all that food in your stomach and all of a sudden things start getting real weird. The other way is if your electrolytes get off. So how do you reboot after something like that? Throwing up is really useful, actually, for those of you who may or may not know that. If you get to that point and it's because you're just not eating well, sometimes you just got to throw up and then start running again. Restart, a little Control-Alt-Delete. What other ideas do we have? How did you come back from that?
A lady gave me some salt tablets.
Salt tablets.
And just kind of kept moving forward.
Yeah.
Drinking more water.
Okay. Salt tablets have saved the day for people more times than most of us would probably like to admit. They come in all sorts of varieties. This one is from Goo. It's got a lot of salt in it. I think it has some caffeine too to make it extra fun when you take it. Yep. There are a lot of other brands. There's S-Caps, Endurolites, and on and on and on. And with these, what do you have to be careful with? Too much. Too much would be the biggest worry that I have for anybody. So how do you know if these are going to be helpful for you? Don't just try them on race day, okay? They're going to be in bottles on the tables. Race directors love to try and help you out with everything you can, but you can hurt yourself. So practice, 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 practice. Try these things in different strengths, different varieties. Try to make yourself sick out there sometime. See how it goes, right? See how much you can eat while you're running, or see how little, how much you can drink, how little you can get away with. So let's talk about afterwards. You survived, right? What's the best thing to drink afterwards? Beer. So often I hear that. And I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, so drink your beer, but it's not helping, actually. I'm sorry. It's good to celebrate that. That's fine. But what's the best thing to have? Ooh, chocolate milk can be good. Something that's going to start putting the building blocks back in your body. I read a brilliant article today by Jordan Rapp. I don't know if anybody knows who Jordan Rapp is, but he's one of a top triathlete in the Ironman world. And he broke his training life into two parts. There's active training, which is what we do when we're out running, right? And then there's passive training, which is all of the rest of the time. And when you're out running, What are you using? You're using up sugar, you're using up your muscles, you're using up all sorts of things. So if you want to get to be a better runner, you need to give your body the tools it needs to put itself back together. There are a couple of windows that are ideal windows to get certain things into your body. The first window is an hour, but people would argue that a half an hour, or even within 10 minutes of finishing, is even better, of getting some type of recovery drink in you. And a recovery drink is going to have some protein in it. It's going to have some amino acids. There is a gazillion different brands out there. Again, try what works for you. After you've had your recovery drink, then have your beer. Okay, I'll let you have it. I'll let you say it's fine. But you need to get that in your system as soon as you can. The second window happens at about an hour and a half to 3 hours afterwards. And what would you want to get in your system then?
Anything for me.
Yeah, food, right? Not gels. It's probably the last thing that you're going to eat, but some real food. Again, real building blocks that your body can put itself back together. How many hours, on average, do you spend running in a week? What's that? Math, I know. So how many people here run 6 days a week? 5 days a week? Okay. So how many people here run 7 hours a week on average? 5 hours? Okay. So 5 hours in a week. How many hours are in a week total? 168 hours. So if you're running, actively training for 5 hours and 160 hours, that means 163 hours of the week you're passively training. Think about that. That's sleeping. That's eating. That's not running, that you're trying to be a better runner or a better person, whatever you're trying to be better at, right? So that's the time where you got to take care of yourself. Eat real food. In that window afterwards, make sure you get a good recovery drink. At the Scout Mountain races, there'll be Ultragen at the finish line. So it might be worth trying beforehand to see if you can actually drink it after you've run that far, not throw up. We discourage throwing up at the finish line at the race. I have to clean it up. Okay, so there we go. Practice, practice, practice. That's the bottom line. I'm going to put one last picture up and ask if there's any questions. This is a picture of that 90-minute window. A few weeks ago, I was in Hong Kong, raced a 50K. We had the awards, and then I went out on the town with a bunch of crazy Australians in Hong Kong City. And we'd had dinner, and then they had their celebratory beers, and then we were wandering around the streets of Hong Kong at 2 a.m. trying to find food. This was not a good idea because this is the kitchen of the restaurant that we ate at that was in the alley in between two skyscrapers in Hong Kong. Good food leads to good, healthy runners. Stuff like this makes you feel really crappy the next day. Do people have questions about nutrition that I could try to answer? I realized that some of the things I talked about tonight were pretty vague. I didn't tell you that you needed to eat a goo every 20 minutes. I told you should try things.
And maybe I'm stupid on this. What's the importance of oranges? Like I see runs all the time with just oranges and bananas.
There's nothing magic about oranges. The magic thing about oranges is that they are cheap and easy for race directors to put on tables. They don't look nasty like bananas or apples if you cut them. And a lot of people eat them. So they must work okay, but there's nothing magic about them. I know they don't work for me. They give me heartburn. When I have heartburn when I run, I feel pretty uncomfortable. But nothing magic. So, good question. It's the same reason that you probably shouldn't eat all of the Skittles and gummy bears that are on the aid station table either, but they taste good and sometimes you eat them. It doesn't go too bad. Other specific nutrition questions? Yeah?
Any local fat adapted ultra runners that you know of?
Yes. So, fat adaptive. Let's talk about that for a minute. That's someone who is not eating very many carbohydrates or none. I know a couple who have had short stints of success followed by big windows of feeling really bad. I don't fully believe that if you're going to be competing or running at a high level or even a moderate level, that you can fuel yourself completely from fat and be effective. I think that your body has systems that work the way they do for a reason. That being said, there is some interesting trends happening in the running world where people are saying that they go on these, I would call it like a fasting run, by not eating anything for a long period of time, supposedly training themselves to burn fat more effectively. I think it just makes you feel really crappy. That's my experience with it, at least. Especially if you're running day after day, I think you just get too depleted. So I do know a very successful fruitarian runner locally that all he eats is fruit. Yeah, well, Damien Stoy lived in Driggs. He eats like 13 bananas a day and 14 grapefruit and watermelon coming out his ears. And it works really well for him. And that's all he eats is fruit. He doesn't eat anything else but fruit.
He's the ultra guy, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So, yeah.
I had another question, sorry.
So it's okay.
So I don't know they,
Oh, I love they.
scientists or otherwise, say that if you just protein load for like a week and then the last 3 or 4 days before you race just carbo load, apparently it's supposed to give you some extra edge, which I don't know how
A lot of that information comes from the weightlifting world, and I don't think it works really well for runners. Try it. If it works for you and it makes you feel better, great. But if not, I'd say just a relatively whole food diet is going to be better for you than trying to do anything too wacky. Other questions? Yeah.
How long into the run do you start taking your gels?
That's a good question. I actually set a timer on my watch to beep at me every 30 minutes. And I start 30 minutes into the run. I feel like if I wait until maybe I'm starting to get closer to being depleted, I'm chasing my tail the whole time. So I start earlier. I also notice that I can eat better earlier in a really long run, like in a 100-miler, for example. I can eat really good for 15 hours, and then the wheels seem to come off, and I can't eat anything but really weird things. Like quesadillas was what I could eat last time. So I can make hay when you can, eat when you can. I would say earlier is better.
Do you start hydrating the same way?
I do. Yep. And it's, I don't always listen to my watch, but I try to have that reminder so that I can stay on top of it. Yeah.
So race strategy, carrying the extra weight to skip aid stations
Ooh.
as compared to less weight the time that
Yeah. That's a really good question, and I would say it depends on the race. If you're familiar, and if the race director's doing a good job, they're going to have a list of what you can expect at the aid stations, and if they have something that you know you can use, carrying less is better. When I raced Hong Kong a few weeks ago, I carried every single gel that I needed for the whole race, for the 50K. It was not a ton of gels, and unfortunately I carried it in a soft flask, and I fell and I blew one up and ended up like trying to suck this gel off my hip because I didn't have enough. This is a really unfortunate series of events. But I knew what I could eat, and I knew in Hong Kong the aid stations were not going to have what I could eat, and so there's definitely strategy to that. So I would plan according to what the race has available. Drop bags are another important part of that too. If you know you only can eat a specific thing and it's not going to be there, get drop bags, get somebody to crew you so you don't have to carry as much.
Do you do like camel and drink a bunch in an aid station and then expect that to last for a little while?
Some people can. That works pretty good for me. I can drink like a full bottle of water or electrolyte drink at an aid station and take one with me instead of having to carry a liter, and I do okay with that. But other people don't. Other people that I race with have horrible results if they try to do that. So it just depends on how your body's adapted. Yeah.
Can I ask a pee question?
Sure.
Do you, like, how closely do you watch your pee during a
I
run?
don't.
You don't?
I mean, I don't. I look when I pee, so I can
Right,
like
no,
I don't pee on my
right.
shoes. But like, I'm not. I don't think that it's good science to base the color of your pee off your hydration status, because a lot of the stuff that we're eating will turn your pee different colors. or lighter, different shades. For example, I like to drink a Red Bull every once in a while, a race for a pick-me-up, and that makes it look like you're peeing out nuclear waste. so it just doesn't.
It's not necessarily a great sign.
I don't think it is. No, and I think if you're running or if you're racing and you're peeing totally clear, that would be the only thing that I would say is be useful is you're probably overhydrated, probably too much. So I think frequency of how often you need to pee is a better indicator than the color. So if you are occasionally peeing, that's great. If you're peeing every 3 miles, you're drinking too much. If you're not peeing at all, you're not drinking enough.
You won't hurt yourself going too much, will you? I mean, you'll slow yourself down.
As long as you're getting salts, no.
Pee on the run.
If you just keep diluting everything out, you can get hyponatremia and end up in a bad way.
Sure.
But to get there, you have to kind of try to get there and be really concerned about drinking a lot. So if you're drinking maybe 1 electrolyte drink to 1 plain water, that would be a good way to make sure you're doing it. So that's good questions. Other good questions that are rattling around in people's brains? Yeah.
Do you find that you eat more on races that are higher in elevation?
No, less, because my stomach doesn't cooperate very well. The energy expenditure tends to be higher, and I tend to be way more wrecked after those races. It takes me a lot longer to recover because I can't eat as much. So elevation certainly comes into play. Yeah, fantastic questions.
Do you have a map where you identify your aid stations for the Scout race?
Yeah. Yeah, on the Scout Mountain website, there's a couple of things. Yeah, there's the map that shows where the aid stations are, and then there's this really geeked out document that took me a really long time to put together that has distance between each aid station, tells you the surface of trail that you're running on, how I consider it as fast or slow. Some people don't agree with me on that. And then what distance to the next aid station. So it's a really good way to plan out your race. And that carries through all 3 of the different races. So, and if you find something on the Scout Mountain site that's lacking that you feel like you need, or don't hesitate to get a hold of me. I'd gladly, especially the local folks, help you out as much as I can. To talk a little bit about practicing for race days, in May, starting the first week of May, is that right? The week after Manan, Pocatello Running is hosting Saturday morning runs on the course to help you get used to the sections of the course. We're going to start in the low country and move to the high country. That's a great time to practice your nutrition, to bounce ideas off other runners that are going to be on those group runs, and to get to know the course so you know where you can be maybe stretching things out a little bit or carrying more.
We'll point out aid stations, where they'll be, obviously they won't be out there on the training runs.
Yeah.
Or are you going to set those up for us?
I might be able to be convinced on one of the real long ones to do something like that.
I'll be out there with Casey.
John will be there as a barbecue and quesadillas, so.
Costco hot dogs for me.
Perfect. What day is that run? I'm in. Any other questions?
See you barfing all.
Yeah, serious. All right, I'm gonna